I had counted 47 ceiling panels before the Vrethian elder finished reading the word that ended my career as a human being and started something else entirely. The chamber smelled like chlorine, and something warm I could not name. 7 species sat in the curved rows above me. I was alone on the floor. The floor was not designed for human posture. I had known this before I arrived, so I had practiced sitting in the wrong kind of chair for 6 months. My spine did not complain. I gave it no permission to. The Vrethian elder's name was something I could pronounce with my mouth but not with my throat. I called him Elder in my head. He had 3 eyes, the third one set back in a ridge of gray skin above the other 2, and all 3 were looking at me with the specific gentleness of someone explaining to a stray dog why it cannot come inside. He said, "The Conclave of 7 has completed its assessment of the human species, referred to herein as the Soul Origin Biological Group, Catalog Reference H1. I sat very still. After full review of soul origin military capacity, biological stress tolerance, cognitive architecture, and interstellar reach, the Conclave Classification Board has assigned the following designation. I had prepared for this. Yael Osei did not prepare for things the way other diplomats prepared, which was to say, she did not read files and rehearse responses. She prepared by deciding, in advance, what her face was going to do. She had decided her face was going to do nothing. Pray, class. The word went out on the conclave broadcast frequency to every inhabited system in the known galaxy. It went out in 43 languages simultaneously. In Vrethian, it carried a specific harmonic that meant not a threat, not a danger, not a concern. In the Kreth 7 dialect, it translated loosely to a thing that runs from larger things. In the language of the Moval, who had joined the conclave 1100 years ago, it translated to something very close to the human word, snack. I had gotten to 47 ceiling panels. The chamber had 212. Ambassador Osei, the elder said. His voice was kind. That was the thing that was most difficult about the elder. He was not cruel. He was not performing superiority. He genuinely believed what he was saying, the way a veterinarian genuinely believes a cat cannot understand the word terminal. You have been a remarkable representative of your species. The conclave wishes to acknowledge your grace, your diligence, and the considerable effort humanity has made in preparing this application. I said, noted. 1 word, full stop, a complete sentence. He waited to see if more would follow. Nothing followed. I had trained myself, over 14 years of diplomatic service, to use silence the way other people used furniture. You put it in a room, and it changed the shape of the room, and you never had to explain it. The Kreth 7 representative, who was made almost entirely of dense dark chitin and moved like a crab made of bad decisions, leaned forward. His speaking apparatus clicked 3 times. The translator rendered it as, the Soul Origin Group may apply again in 50 cycles. 50 cycles was roughly 230 human years. I thought about my daughter. She had asked me, before I left, what the aliens would be like. She was 11. I had told her they would be interesting. She had said, with the confidence of an 11-year-old who had read everything she could find on xeno-contact theory, that she hoped they were friendly. I stopped thinking about my daughter. The Moval representative, who appeared to be a collection of iridescent gas, held loosely together by what I had been told was willpower, made a sound that the translator did not attempt to render. After a moment it tried again, and produced, we would also note that the Soul Origin Group's Emotional Volatility Index presents certain challenges to full membership consideration. I looked at the Moval. I did not feel volatile. I felt like 47 ceiling panels and a very old anger that I had taken out exactly twice in my life, and both times had been very expensive and very efficient, and I had put it back in its box afterward, and locked the box and put the key somewhere I could always find it. The conclave, the elder continued, wishes to extend an invitation. The Soul Origin Group is welcome to maintain observer status within our proceedings. A seat on the External Advisory Board will be made available, with full access to conclave public broadcasts and the right to submit written inquiries on a quarterly basis. An advisory board. A quarterly basis. I had traveled 11 light years for a quarterly basis. I said, thank you. I did not say what I was thinking. What I was thinking was, I am going to sit in that chair for as long as it takes. and I am very, very good at sitting in chairs. I sent one encrypted transmission to Earth before I left the chamber. 3 words. The security protocol on the channel was something the Conclave did not know existed, which was fine, because they had already decided we were not worth worrying about. The 3 words were, "Begin the clock." I walked out of the chamber and into the corridor, which smelled like chlorine and not cinnamon, and I counted ceiling panels there too, because it was something to do with my hands without using my hands, and because the number was different, and I wanted to know it. 44. Different architect, same building. Interesting. The Vrethian Jr., assigned to escort me to my quarters, was named something I could pronounce with my whole mouth. I called him Nev in my head, because that was what the first 2 syllables sounded like. He walked beside me at the careful distance of someone who had been told the correct distance to walk beside a prey-class species. He smelled like the warm thing I could not name. I decided not to name it. He said, "Ambassador, I am sorry for the outcome." I looked at him. He had 2 eyes, both of them large and brown in the way that suggested either sincerity or very good evolutionary pressure toward appearing sincere. The 3rd eye, in Vrethians, was only present in elders. Nev was young. He had not grown it yet. I said, "Don't be." He tilted his head. In Vrethians, this meant something close to the human expression of confusion, but politer, like confusion that had been raised well. I said, "This is useful information." He did not ask what I meant. He was young enough to be uncertain whether asking was appropriate, and careful enough to choose silence. I liked that about him. I made a small note, not on paper, in the place in my head where I kept things that might matter later. We reached my quarters. The door was of Vrethian design, which meant it opened upward instead of to the side, which meant every time I entered, I had to resist the instinct to duck. I had been resisting this instinct for 11 days. I had not ducked once. I went inside. I sat on the floor, which was more comfortable than the chair. I thought, "Prey class." I thought, 50 cycles. I thought, "Noted." And then I opened my personal terminal and began reading the Conclave's full military treaty archive, starting from the beginning, at the year 1 of their calendar, which was approximately 4,000 years before humans had figured out fire was useful for things other than warmth. I read for 9 hours. Then I slept for 4. Then I read again. Outside, the galaxy went on assuming what it had always assumed. Inside, the clock had started. The first year, I attended every session of the Conclave's Outer Council. There were 41 sessions. I submitted 3 written inquiries, as permitted. I asked about propulsion treaty definitions, about the specific language used to define prohibited biological adaptations in warfare, and about the historical classification criteria for the prey class designation. That last one caused a small stir. The Vrethian Administrative Office sent back a formal response, explaining that the criteria were based on 3,000 years of consistent observation across 46 species assessments. They were very thorough. They included survival rate metrics under predator pressure, technological development timelines relative to environmental threat levels, and something called the persistence coefficient, which was a measure of how long a species continued attempting a failed strategy before abandoning it. Humans scored very high on persistence. The Vrethian office noted this in the response as a data point, not as a compliment. I read it as both. Nev brought me tea on the 7th day of the 2nd month. He did not announce this. He simply appeared at the entrance to my observer's area, which was a narrow raised section at the back of the council chamber, where the seats were slightly smaller than comfortable, and he set a cup down beside me without interrupting the session. The tea tasted like metal and something floral that I would never be able to describe to anyone on Earth without sounding like I was making it up. I drank all of it. I said nothing about it. He did this every session after that. By the end of the first year, I had catalogued the following. The Conclave's fastest warship class could reach a velocity of 0.4 light. Their primary projectile-based weapons had a minimum effective range of 800 kilometers. Their energy shielding technology was impressive but drew from a centralized power source, which meant it had a single point of structural vulnerability that nobody seemed worried about because no enemy had ever successfully reached it. The reason no enemy had ever successfully reached it was that no enemy had survived long enough. I wrote none of this down in any place the Conclave could access. I kept it in my head, organized in the way I had organized my memory since I was a child in Accra, learning to carry more than was written, because what was written could be taken. In the second year, I learned that the Kreth-7 had a biological quirk that made them extremely sensitive to a specific frequency of light. This was not in any public document. I learned it by watching the Kreth-7 representative adjust his seating position 3 times during a council session that featured a new lighting installation in the east wall. He moved away from the east wall each time. He did not appear to realize he was doing it. I noted which frequency the lighting emitted. I submitted no inquiry about this. In the third year, Nev asked me how humans slept. We were in the corridor after a long session on trade route redesignation. He asked the question the way someone asks when they have been curious for a long time and have finally decided the curiosity outweighs the awkwardness. I told him we slept flat, mostly, on our backs or sides, eyes closed, for roughly a third of every day. He said that in Vrethians, sleep was more like a dimming. They remained partially alert. They had never fully lost consciousness in the way humans did. I said, "That sounds exhausting." He tilted his head again. The polite confusion. I was learning all 42 of his expressions by then, though I had only named about 30. He said, "We find it difficult to understand how your species functions, given the vulnerability of full unconsciousness." I said, "We manage." He said, "You must trust your environment very deeply." I thought about this for a moment. I thought about a species that had evolved in an environment where going fully unconscious meant not waking up. I thought about a species that had evolved in an environment where going fully unconscious was simply something you did every night, and you got up in the morning, and you did it again. I said, "Or we don't think about it." He seemed to find this more strange than the sleeping itself. By the 4th year, the sensor station at Kreth-7's outer boundary, near the edge of human-monitored space, had gone dark twice. Both times were listed in the Conclave's incident log as equipment failure. The Kreth-7 filed standard maintenance reports. Nobody followed up. I filed my quarterly written inquiry on schedule, as always. I asked about the history of the Conclave's conflict resolution protocols. By the 5th year, the shipping data from human-controlled lanes had changed in a way that I noticed, and that the Conclave had not noticed yet, because the Conclave was not looking at human shipping data with the same attention it applied to species it considered capable of being interesting. The total mass being moved through human shipping lanes had increased by a factor of 11. For a prey-class species, this was unusual. For a prey-class species that had begun the clock 5 years ago, this was entirely expected. I sent my regular observer's report to the Conclave Administrative Office. It was accurate in every detail. It contained nothing that was untrue. It also contained nothing that would prompt anyone to ask the question that would have led to the answer that would have changed everything. I was very good at reports. Nev had told me, by the 5th year, that he had been reassigned 3 times to other roles and had requested, each time, to return to the Outer Council Observer Division. His supervisors found this mildly eccentric. The Outer Council Observer Division handled non-member species liaison, which was considered the least prestigious assignment in the Conclave Diplomatic Corps, roughly equivalent to answering correspondence from species who would never amount to anything. He never told me directly that the reason he kept requesting the reassignment was the tea deliveries. He did not need to tell me. I had Expression 31, catalogued by the 3rd year. Expression 31 was the one that appeared when he was explaining something he thought was obvious. He thought it was obvious that he kept coming back. I thought it was not obvious at all. I thought it was one of the most complicated things anyone had done for me in 5 years, and I kept that thought in the same place I kept everything else that was not for sharing. In the 6th year, a young Moval representative arrived at the Outer Council, fresh from their internal training program, and made the mistake of referring to the Sol Origin observer seat as the decorative chair, which was apparently a Moval diplomatic term for a seat held by a non-participating species. I was sitting in the decorative chair at the time. I did not respond. I submitted no inquiry. I added the Moval trade route data to the section of my memory organized under the heading of things that would be relevant later. In the 7th year, Earth sent me a new encrypted channel update. The transmission was 4 seconds long. It contained updated specifications that I read once, and then stored in the place that was not paper. I had not been home in 4 years. My daughter Adaeze sent voice messages. She sent one every 2 weeks without fail. She had been doing this since she turned 20, which was when she had apparently decided that waiting for responses was a strategy she was willing to abandon. The messages were about her work, mostly. She was in propulsion. She talked about thrust ratios and fuel efficiency curves with the same energy that some people use to describe falling in love, and I listened to every message at low volume, in my quarters, after the sessions, and I said nothing back because anything I said would require me to open a door I was keeping closed. The door had her voice on the other side of it. I was very good at closed doors. In the 8th year, a Kreth 7 sensor post at the outer edge of their monitored zone picked up an anomaly in human space. The anomaly was logged. It was reviewed by 3 analysts. All 3 assessed it as sensor drift. It was not sensor drift. The Kreth 7 analyst who came closest to the correct conclusion was transferred to a different department 6 weeks later for unrelated reasons, and her notes on the anomaly were filed under pending review, which was the category where things went when nobody was going to look at them again. I read the session transcripts from the conclave's internal science advisory board. I was allowed access to these as part of my observer status. The advisory board had discussed the anomaly for 11 minutes in a quarterly meeting. They had concluded it was consistent with natural stellar variation. I submitted a written inquiry about natural stellar variation in that region of space. The response came back in 2 weeks. It was thorough, accurate, and completely unhelpful to anyone trying to understand what was actually happening. I sent the response to Earth, along with my observer's report. Earth sent back a single character. The character was a period, which meant, we are on schedule. In the 9th year, I had been sitting in the observer's chair for longer than some Vrethian diplomatic careers. Nev had been promoted twice within his division, which he found annoying because each promotion came with a new desk assignment that required him to resubmit the tea delivery as an official task, rather than an informal one. He resubmitted it each time. His supervisors had stopped questioning it. I had learned, by the 9th year, something that the conclave had never thought to consider about human beings. We are patient in the specific way of a species that learned patience the hard way, which is to say, not as a virtue but as a tool. Patience is something you pick up because you need it, the way you pick up a stone because the ground in front of you requires it, not because you are peaceful, because you are planning. The elder had called us remarkable in the assessment 9 years ago. He had meant it the way you call a child remarkable for stacking blocks very high before they fall. He had not considered that some children stack blocks because they are learning how gravity works. On the morning of the session I would later think of as the last ordinary session, I arrived at the outer council chamber at my usual time. I sat in my usual chair, which I no longer needed to adjust for because I had reshaped my posture over 9 years, until the chair fit me, or I fit it, which were not the same thing but had the same result. Nev set the tea down beside me. I looked at it. I looked at him. He had expression 22 on. The one I had catalogued as something close to the human expression of, I think something is about to change. I picked up the tea. I drank it. The session began. And somewhere on the edge of conclave space, in the dark between stars where nobody had been looking because nobody had thought to look, something very large and very patient came to a stop and waited. It had been waiting for a long time. It was very good at waiting. It had learned from the best. The display screen in the outer council chamber was not designed to show what it was showing. The system was built to render standard conclave traffic, diplomatic vessels, supply convoys, and the occasional cartographic update. It rendered in soft amber lines on a dark field, clean and easy to read, designed for species with a range of visual sensitivities. It had shown the same kind of information for 11 years without incident. Now it was showing something it did not have a template for. The conclave alert system had triggered at 0340 chamber time. I had been awake. I am almost always awake at 0340. This is not a virtue. It is what 9 years of diplomatic isolation does to your relationship with sleep. The emergency session convened in 40 minutes. Every senior representative from every member species. The chamber that usually held a fraction of its capacity was full. The smell of 7 different biological atmospheres was something I would not try to describe. I sat in my observer's chair in the back, exactly where I always sat, and I watched the display screen. One ship. It sat at the exact outer boundary of conclave-recognized territorial space. Not inside, not at a station, not transmitting on any standard frequency. It was sitting at the line, the way you sit at the edge of someone's property and look at their house without stepping onto the grass. The elder was at the front of the chamber. His third eye, the one that appeared with age, was fully open. I had only seen it fully open twice before, both times during votes on matters he considered serious. He said, in the measured voice that I had heard make 500 procedural statements over 9 years without variation, the Conclave Security Division will provide a preliminary assessment. The security representative, a Vrethian, in the division I had never spoken to directly, pulled up the sensor data. The vessel is of unknown classification, she said. Mass signature is inconsistent with known construction methods. Drive signature does not match any cataloged propulsion type. Hull composition reads as a combination of materials our sensors have not previously encountered in combination. Someone in the upper tier made a sound. The translator did not try to render it. The security representative continued. The vessel is not transmitting on any conclave frequency. It is, however, transmitting on a narrow-band signal in a direction consistent with the Sol Origin home system. Every face in the chamber that had a face turned to look at me. I was looking at the display screen. The ship was large, not the largest thing I had ever seen data on, but large in the specific way of something that had been built with a purpose, and that purpose was not tourism. It sat at the boundary line without moving, without transmitting to the conclave, without doing anything at all. It had been there for 6 hours before the alert triggered. 6 hours is a long time to sit at someone's door without knocking. The Creth 7 representative, whose name I had learned over 9 years and could now pronounce correctly, stood. His speaking apparatus produced a sound I had come to associate with controlled alarm, which in Creth 7 was a clicking at the second joint of the left forward limb, combined with a specific posture of the upper body. The translator rendered it as, "The Sol Origin group must explain this incursion." I said, "It is not an incursion. The vessel is outside your territorial boundary." The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when a decorative chair speaks for the first time. The elder looked at me, all 3 eyes. He said, "Ambassador Osei, do you have knowledge of this vessel's presence or purpose?" I said, "I know it is there." He waited. I said nothing else. This was technically accurate. I had known the vessel was there for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. I had known the specific mass configuration because my daughter had sent me the specifications in the 4th second of a 4-second transmission, compressed into a format that looked like a routine communications timestamp error and was not. I had not looked at the ship's crew manifest on the display. I was not going to look at it. The security representative was still pulling data. She said, "The vessel's energy output is consistent with a powered-down state. It is not actively charging any weapon system." "Yet," someone said. The translator attributed it to the Moval section of the chamber. I filed this away. "We have attempted hailing on 47 frequencies," the security representative said. I knew the number she was going to say before she said it. "There has been no response." Nev was not in the session. He was in his regular assignment area. I thought about this for a moment, and then stopped thinking about it. The elder said, "The conclave requests that the Sol Origin observer convey a formal message to this vessel. The message is as follows: identify yourself, state your purpose, and withdraw to a distance of no less than 3 standard orbital units from the conclave boundary." I said, "I will transmit." I transmitted. The response came back in 40 seconds. Not to the conclave channel. To my personal terminal. To the narrow encrypted band that looked like nothing, that had no address attached to any Sol Origin diplomatic protocol, that existed only because 9 years ago I had set it up and given the access code to 3 people on Earth, and nobody else. My daughter's voice came through the speaker at low volume. I had it set to low because I always had it set to low. Even now, even here. She said, "Hey Mum, you should probably come home now. We've got a table set." Then she said the 4 words that I had been holding a place for, in the section of my memory that I kept cleared and ready, for 9 years. She said, "You can come home." The chamber was watching me. I kept my face doing nothing. I was very good at this. I sent a formal diplomatic response to the conclave on the standard observer channel. It said, "The Sol Origin vessel is awaiting formal diplomatic contact through appropriate channels. A representative should be dispatched." Then I put my terminal face down on the armrest of my observer's chair, which was not a gesture I had ever made in 9 years, and I watched the display screen. The ship sat at the boundary. The chamber watched the ship. I watched the chamber. The security representative said, "We are detecting a second contact point on the outer sensor grid." She said it very carefully. A second vessel appeared on the display. Then a third. Then the display did what good equipment does when it encounters a situation it was not designed for. It scaled. The amber lines pulled back. The field expanded. The boundary line moved to the edge of the screen to accommodate the new information. The new information was considerable. The Kreth 7 representative made the sound associated with controlled alarm again. Then a sound the translator had never tried to render before. Then a third sound that I had only heard once in 9 years, at a session I was not supposed to remember as clearly as I did, when the conclave had discussed a theoretical scenario involving a species that had developed faster than the models predicted. The translator attempted the third sound. It came back as a single word. The word was, "How?" The display continued to scale. The boundary line reached the very edge of the screen. The ships kept coming. The elder turned to look at me. His third eye was open so wide it had changed the shape of his face, pulled the skin around it tight. He said, "Ambassador." I said, "Yes." He said, "What is the purpose of this assembly?" I thought about 47 ceiling panels. I thought about 9 years of tea delivered quietly, and 42 catalogued expressions, and a specific frequency of light that made a Kreth 7 representative move his chair. I thought about a 4-second transmission. I thought about a voice message I had listened to at low volume in my quarters, and had not responded to because responding would have meant opening a door. I thought about my daughter saying, "You can come home." I said, "The Sol Origin group would like to renegotiate its membership application." The chamber was very quiet. The display scaled again. I looked at the boundary line, now a thin amber thread at the screen's left edge, and I looked at what was on the other side of it, and I thought, this is what a clock looks like when it finishes. The negotiating table was a different shape than the observer seat. That sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. I had sat in the observer seat for 9 years. The observer seat was narrow, positioned at an angle that kept the observer slightly behind the main sight lines, slightly off the center of the room. Designed so that the occupant could watch without being watched. Designed so that the occupant could be present without being considered. The negotiating table was at the center of the chamber floor. I sat at it with my back straight and my hands flat on the surface, and I did not adjust my posture for the chair, because the chair here was made for something close to human proportions, which the conclave had sourced in the 4 hours between the end of the emergency session and the beginning of the formal talks. The fact that they had sourced a correct chair in 4 hours told me something I already knew. They were very capable when they wanted to be. The elder sat across from me. Beside him were the senior representatives of the Kreth 7 collective, the Moval cluster, and 4 other species whose names translated poorly, and whose expressions I had spent 9 years beginning to learn. Nev was not at the table. He was in the observation section at the back. I did not look at him. I had the paper on the table in front of me. Real paper. I had carried it from Earth, 11 years ago in the lining of a travel bag. I had carried it for 9 years without using it. I had a pen that was also real, also from Earth, simple and black and ordinary. The elder looked at the paper. He looked at the pen. His expression was the same kind of careful I had seen him use when something was outside his categories. I said, "I would like to begin." He said, "Of course." I said, "The Sol Origin group is withdrawing its previous application for observer tier status." A sound moved through the chamber like wind through a narrow space. I said, "We are submitting a new application. The terms are as follows." I looked at the paper. The paper was blank. I had written nothing on it. I knew everything I was going to say, in order, without a note. The paper was there because I wanted them to watch me not need it. "The Sol Origin group requests full voting membership in the Conclave of 7, I said, "with equal access to all treaty proceedings, all closed session deliberations, and all security councils. We request the establishment of a Sol Origin permanent diplomatic presence at the Conclave Station, with facilities appropriate to a full member species. We request amendment of the Conclave Charter to reflect the current number of recognized member species, which will become 8 upon ratification. The elder said, Ambassador, these are significant requests. I said, they are standard membership terms, the same terms held by every current member. The Creth 7 representative said, through the translator, the Sol Origin Group does not currently meet the criteria for standard membership. I said, the criteria for standard membership include demonstrated interstellar reach, functional governance structure, and the capacity to contribute to collective security. I would be glad to address each of these in turn, but I think the display data from the past several hours has addressed them more efficiently than I could. Nobody responded to this. I continued. There is one additional term, I said. It is non-negotiable. I picked up the pen. I wrote 2 words on the paper. I turned the paper so the elder could read it. He read it. The words were, Pray class. Below them I had written, corrected. The elder said, the classification system is a scientific record. It is not subject to diplomatic renegotiation. I said, then we will renegotiate the scientific record. He said, that is not how the record functions. I said, the record classified a species based on observations made at a specific point in time. The observations have changed. The classification should reflect the current data. The Creth 7 representative said, the classification reflects capacity at time of assessment. I said, then reassess. Silence. I let the silence work. The Moval representative, the one who had used the term decorative chair in the 6th year, made a sound. The translator rendered it as, how did the Sol Origin Group develop this capacity without conclave awareness? I said, you did not ask. This answer was accurate. No member of the conclave had ever submitted a query to the Sol Origin Observer regarding human technological development. They had assumed the answer was not interesting. In 9 years of observer status, I had been asked 16 questions. 14 of them were procedural. One was Nev asking how humans slept. One was the elder asking, in the session after the first sensor station went dark, whether I had noticed any unusual activity in human space. I had said, no unusual activity. This was also technically accurate. The elder said, the capacity you have assembled represents a significant shift in the balance of conclave-adjacent space. I said, yes. He said, this shift was not disclosed. I said, I was an observer. Observers do not disclose. They observe. This landed the way I intended it to land, which was not gently. The Creth 7 representative made a sound that required no translation. It was the sound of something very large, and very certain discovering it was neither of those things. I said, I want to be clear about something. The Sol Origin Group is not here to threaten the conclave. We are not here to displace any member species, or contest any current territorial agreement. We have no interest in the conclave's internal structure. What we are here to do is take our seat. The elder said, and if the conclave does not grant the seat? I looked at him. He knew the answer. I could see that he knew the answer, in the way that the third eye had gone very still. I said, the Sol Origin Group would like to resolve this diplomatically. He said, and the fleet at our boundary. I said, is what makes the math easier. Silence again. I let it work again. It was very good at its job. Nev, in the observation section, had expression 17, the one I had catalogued as afraid, but there was something else beside it, something I had not seen before, something that required a new number. I gave it 43. It was the expression of someone watching something they had believed was small, reveal that it was not small, and not knowing how to feel about the fact that they had brought it tea for 9 years, and it had always been kind about the tea. I would think about that later, not now. Now I picked up my pen and I wrote the full terms on the paper, by hand, slowly and clearly, because I wanted them to watch a prey-class species write its own future in the room where that word had been given to it. The Moval representative said, very quietly, the classification board will require a formal petition for reclassification. I said, I have it prepared. I put it on the table. I had prepared it 6 years ago. The elder looked at the petition. He looked at me. All three eyes. The third eye closed slightly. Not all the way. Just enough to change the quality of his attention. He said, "You have been planning this for the entirety of your observer tenure." I said, "I have been attending sessions and submitting quarterly inquiries." He said, "Ambassador Osei." I said, "Elder." He said, "What do you want from us?" It was the first time in 9 years he had asked me a question that was not procedural. I said, "The same thing we always wanted. A seat at the table, a voice in the room, a record that reflects what we are, rather than what you assumed we were." He said, "And the correction to the record." I said, "That one first." The session took 4 hours. At the end of 4 hours, the conclave voted on the preliminary membership terms. 5 species voted in favor, 2 abstained, none voted against, because voting against required a public statement of reasoning, and the reasoning available was not reasoning anyone wanted to put in the public record. The classification board would meet within 30 days. The formal petition would be reviewed. The reclassification would be completed before the first joint session. They offered the new designation before I left. They said they were still completing the translation, but the preliminary term meant something close to a species of notable strategic development. I said, "Show me the original language." They showed me. It translated more closely to origin of concern. I thought about this. I said, "Close enough." I picked up my paper. I capped my pen and put it in my pocket, where it would travel home with me in 3 days, across 11 light years, in the kind of speed that prey-class species were not supposed to be able to build. I did not look at Nev on the way out. At the door, I stopped. I turned around. I said, "The tea was very good, over the years." He had expression 43. He would probably develop a new one by the time we met again at a joint session. I was looking forward to cataloging it. The ship my daughter commanded smelled like recycled air and machine oil, and something faintly sweet that I eventually identified as a specific brand of packaged biscuits from a bakery in Lagos that had been shipping to orbital stations for 6 years now, which meant the supply chain had grown considerably since the last time I checked, which was the kind of detail that told you everything about what Earth had been doing while I was sitting in a narrow chair watching aliens count votes. Adiaze met me at the docking connection. She was 29. The last time I had seen her in person she was 20, home from her first year of propulsion studies, taller than I remembered, carrying herself with the specific posture of someone who has just learned that what they are very good at is also what they love. Now she was 29, and she was the officer commanding a vessel that the conclave's best analysts had spent 4 days trying to classify, and had ultimately filed under the category of, "We will need a new category." She hugged me. I hugged her back. I did not say anything for a moment. She did not require me to. She had, at some point in the 9 years, acquired the ability to stand in my silences without filling them, which meant she had either inherited something from me or learned it the hard way, and I was not sure which one I hoped it was. She pulled back. She looked at me. She said, "You look the same." I said, "You look like someone who builds engines for a living." She said, "That's because I build engines for a living." She showed me to a cabin. It was a crew cabin, small and practical, with a bunk that had been made up with a blanket I recognized from home, which meant someone had packed it specifically for this voyage, which meant someone had been thinking about this moment long enough to think about what blanket I would want. I sat on the bunk. I put my hands on the blanket. On the table in the corner was a container of food from my sister-in-law, who had apparently sent it with the ship in a sealed cold unit. It was slightly stale by the time I opened it. It was the best thing I had eaten in 9 years. I ate it slowly. Adiaze sat across from me and did not talk while I was eating, which was exactly correct, because there are times when the most important thing another person can do for you is not talk. When I finished, she said, "Did it go the way you wanted?" I thought about this. I said, "It went." She accepted this. She had, by 29, learned not to push at the places I kept things. We did not talk about the fleet. We did not talk about the timeline or the construction yards or the 11 years of classified development that had moved through human space, like something very large moving through very dark water, slowly and without lights. We did not talk about any of it, because there was nothing to explain. She knew what she had built. I knew what I had done. Between those two things, the whole story existed without needing to be told. She made tea. It did not taste like metal and something floral. It tasted like what tea is supposed to taste like. I drank it. She said. What were they like? The conclave. I thought about chlorine, and the warm thing I could not name. I thought about the elder's third eye, fully open, watching me from across a table, where I had just written 2 words on paper. I thought about Nev, and expression 43, and the fact that he had delivered tea for 9 years, without being asked to stop or continue, without ever knowing which of those I would have preferred. I said, interesting. She waited. I said, they were not cruel. That is the most important thing about them. They were not cruel. They genuinely believed what they believed. They looked at everything they knew about the galaxy, and they drew a conclusion, and the conclusion was wrong, and they have no idea how it happened. Adayaze said, because they didn't know what to look for. I said, because they had never had to look. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what did you do, all those years? In the sessions? I said, I counted ceiling panels. She looked at me. I said, and I paid attention. She nodded slowly, in the way that meant she was filing this away in the same way I had always filed things, which was in the category of, true, and I will think about it later, and I will probably understand it more fully in 5 years. She was very much mine. The thought arrived without announcement, and I put it somewhere safe before it could do anything to my face. She said, the classification, are they changing it? I said, within 30 days. She said, to what? I said, origin of concern. She thought about this. She said, that's fair. I said, that is what I thought. She refilled the tea. I listened to the ship around us, which was the sound of everything we had built in the 9 years I had been sitting still, all of it moving now, crossing space, at a speed that should not have been possible according to the propulsion models the Conclave had been using for 300 years. My daughter had helped redesign those models. She had not published the redesigns. She had put them in engines. I thought about the voice messages, the ones I had listened to at low volume over 9 years without responding. I thought about the Thursday messages about fuel efficiency, and the ones on Sunday evenings that started with, hey Mom, nothing important, just checking. The ones from the year she turned 23 that were a little shorter than usual, a little more careful, when she had figured out something important about the work, and had wanted to tell me, and had not known if I could hear it safely. I had heard all of it. All of it. I said, I listened to everything you sent. She looked at me over her tea. I said, I want you to know that. She said, I know. She said it quietly and without performance, which meant she had known for a while, and had decided, in the way of someone who builds engines and does not waste energy on things already in motion, that it did not require a response. She was right. It did not require a response. It just required saying. We sat for a while longer, in the small cabin that smelled like machine oil, and Lagos biscuits, and the specific closeness of a space that had been made ready for someone's arrival. Outside, in the dark, the fleet was moving. The conclave was meeting an emergency session to discuss the next 30 days. The elder was sitting in his chamber with his third eye most of the way open. Nev was probably making tea for someone who would not be me, and would not know what the tea meant the way I had learned what it meant. The galaxy was reclassifying something it had been wrong about for 11 years. Adaeze said, was it worth it? I looked at the blanket from home under my hands. I put my palm flat on the viewport beside the bunk, where Earth was a smudge of light too small to resolve into anything recognizable from this distance. She did not ask again. She had learned, at some point in 29 years, that some questions are not answered, because the answer exists somewhere below language, in the place where you keep the things that are true, before you have words for them. I kept my hand on the glass. The ship moved. The galaxy had called us weak. We had written 2 words on paper in the center of their chamber, and watched them read it. The galaxy had called us prey. We had built a fleet in the dark, and then sat at their boundary for 6 hours doing nothing, which was the most frightening thing we could have done, because nothing is what you do when you are not afraid. The galaxy had given us a chair at the back of a room, and a quarterly inquiry limit, and a word that meant snack in one of their languages. I had sat in that chair for 9 years. I had counted ceiling panels and catalogued expressions and delivered observer reports that were accurate in every detail and contained nothing, absolutely nothing, that would prompt the question that would have led to the answer that would have changed everything. I had been very good at saying nothing. And then I had said something. And here we were. I took my hand off the glass. I finished the tea. I slept. On my back. Eyes closed. The way humans have always slept. Fully, and without apology, in the deep unconsciousness that every other species in the known galaxy found incomprehensible. The galaxy could not understand how we trusted our environment enough to go under like that. The galaxy did not understand that we do not trust our environment. We are simply very sure of what we will do when we wake up.